Thank you. I want to thank the members of the Public Health Committee for enduring all of these hours. And I also would like to thank everyone who spoke up about endometriosis, as I'm not testifying on that, but I have suffered for years and was diagnosed through surgery. So if my testimony in the future would be helpful, I'm willing to offer that to anyone who might need that. But I am here this evening to talk about opposition to Bill 52261. And I want to discuss the issue of safety. Throughout the day, I've heard many times that abortion is a safe procedure, and therefore we need more access in regards to midwives and APRNs. I'd like to bring to the attention of the Public Health Committee 3 pending lawsuits that you can find online, and I can submit the information. And they are all against Planned Parenthood of Southern New England. One in particular is against a midwife who tragically, when a pregnant woman came to Planned Parenthood, she told her that she was 6 weeks pregnant and that the fetus had died. And she presented her the option of taking chemical abortion pills. This woman did take those chemical abortion pills, and tragically, when she went home and she later had a abortion at home and she delivered this baby into the toilet, it was found to be a child that was 22 weeks gestation. And tragically, her partner had to cut the umbilical cord and she had to go to the emergency room. And as you can imagine, thinking that you have a deceased 6-week child and then finding out through delivering a child into the toilet that it actually was a viable child is very traumatic. And there's another pending lawsuit against Planned Parenthood of Southern New England that is against an APRN who had a botched IUD situation with a particular patient, and that caused her to have a pregnancy that she did not want to have. And so she is suing Planned Parenthood. These are cases that you can read about online, but there are more safety cases that I have personally talked to patients and women who have suffered botched abortions and perforated uteruses, infertility when it comes to surgical abortions, but also chemical abortions. And unfortunately, in some of their situations, they have not been able to tell their story. The women that I've met with, many of them are women of color, Black women like myself, and they haven't all had the means to be able to, or even the time to be able to have a lawsuit. And I want to speak on their behalf because we're talking about allowing midwives and allowing APRNs to perform surgical abortions, which I believe would lead to an increase in situations like this, where women are being harmed and their safety is brought into question. And so that is why I oppose this legislation, because I think that it has to do with politics, and it's putting politics above the health and the safety of women. And I ask the committee to please consider what I said, and if there's any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Thank you for your testimony. Representative Dauphiné has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Christina, for your testimony. Do you think this bill has any harmful implications in the fight for maternal mortality in the Black community?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do, actually. So I think now this is something that people may not fully understand, but I'll explain the best that I can. When women have had traumatic experiences with abortion providers, those that have had traumatic experiences with abortion providers, sometimes because of that trauma, they are triggered by even seeing the building, perhaps if they had an abortion at a Planned Parenthood and it was traumatic for them. Even driving by that Planned Parenthood building could be something that is triggering to them. Now, if the provider only provides abortions and the woman has had a traumatic experience, then if she does not want to have an abortion again for the rest of her life, she can avoid that provider and therefore avoid some of that trauma as she's working towards being healed, which is the case for some women that I have worked with who are in therapy and seeking healing. But when you bring midwives into the conversation, if women are having traumatic experiences because midwives have performed an abortion, then they could be less likely to want to see a midwife after that. even if it's a different midwife. If they had a traumatic experience with one midwife, in the future, they may be a little bit less willing to see another midwife. And so, therefore, that can be problematic when African American women, especially, we have the highest rates of maternal mortality. And midwives and doulas are so important for us in helping reduce maternal mortality. So, for midwives to take on abortion and then add that to what they do, that could lead even some women who have never had an abortion, they might not feel comfortable going to a midwife who they know performs abortion. So I, as someone who is a person that's very careful with the doctors and the nurses and the OBGYNs that I see, I don't feel comfortable seeing someone who performs abortion. And unfortunately, I had an experience where I did not know that a doctor did, and that was information was held when I was on the pursuit of getting help with my endometriosis. That was before it was diagnosed. But when I found out that she did abortions, I was upset that that information was withheld from me because I would have liked to go to a different provider. And so, again, in the Black community, our maternal mortality and infant mortality rates are so high. And midwives and doulas are so important to what they do. It could be detrimental to those that hear my toddler screaming in the background, but it's his bedtime.
Thank you, Christina. Do you think there's a lack of access in Connecticut?
A lack of access to abortion. Connecticut, I travel all across the country, and Connecticut has some of the strongest abortion laws in the entire nation. We've codified, Roe versus Wade into state law. We don't have any parental notification laws. We don't require parental consent for minors. We don't have any mandatory ultrasound laws. We don't have any waiting period laws. Our pregnancy centers have unfortunately been regulated, I guess you could say, by legislation that I think is unfair, but we obviously have a very pro-abortion state, and I do not believe that there is a lack of access. In my prior years, I served as a pregnancy resource center leader, and I met many women who've had abortions, and they did not have any delay in getting an abortion. There's abortion clinics all throughout our state, and even during the pandemic, they've remained open, and especially now with chemical abortion and the fact that the FDA has allowed abortion pills to be given out through the mail. I'm constantly seeing advertisements online about abortion pills, even in Connecticut, that can be delivered to someone's home. And so the idea that we have a lack of access, it doesn't add up. I think that is a political argument. There are states, as we know, that are restricting abortion, and there's states that are looking at bans, 15-week abortion bans. Mississippi, obviously Texas has a ban on abortion after a heartbeat, but Connecticut is a very different state. And when we talk about abortion and we talk about the possibility of legislation in other states impacting us, I highly doubt that women from Texas or Mississippi are going to come to Connecticut to get an abortion. That was mentioned before, that the possibility of this legislation across the country could cause women to come to Connecticut, and therefore we would see a need for greater access. And I don't see how that's possible just based on what I've observed over 17 years of working with pregnant women and families.
Thank you for that. And just one last question. You spoke about the political aspect of this. Can you speak a little bit more to that? Because I wasn't sure what you were talking about. And that would be my last question. So thank you.
You're welcome. What I was trying to describe when I said that is that abortion is obviously, as we know, it's a procedure, but there are politics involved from Roe v. Wade, Doe v. Bolton, all the way until now. And tragically, across the country, there are movements that are really designed to advance abortion access regardless of safety and regardless of how it can impact women's health. I think part of that is seen when you look at what's happening with the FDA. At one point, the FDA was taking data when it comes to the chemical abortion pill and complications, and they were collecting that data. But now they're only collecting data if a woman dies from the abortion pill. And that's really dangerous because there are women who have almost died, some of them who I know, and that information isn't being seen. And so therefore you can have people say things like abortion is the safest Tylenol, and a woman who doesn't understand all of the research and history might think, okay, abortion's as safe as a Tylenol, an abortion pill, and takes that, and then God forbid she hemorrhages, or God forbid she's left with infertility or something like that. It isn't always the case, of course, but it does happen. And in the same way, we see that there is a fear that people have, and I have empathy for that. There's a fear that people have that abortion access could be restricted because they see it happening across the country. And so because of that fear, they want to advance abortion laws and strengthen abortion laws. And as I said, advocate for abortion on demand with no apologies, so to speak. And I think that this legislation plays into that because we're not thinking primarily about women's health and women's safety and how this could impact them. And I am particularly burdened by this, being a woman of color, being someone who was born to a low-income woman who was coerced into having an abortion, but thankfully at the last minute, it took a janitor who talked to my mom at that last moment when she was in Mount Sinai Hospital in Hartford, Connecticut, and she paid for the abortion. It took a janitor to offer her the care that she needed, which was just basically a question of, do you want to have your baby? And my mom said yes, and she walked out. But that was after she left the counselor's room, and that was after the doctor yelled at her. So I know that there is abuse, and I know that there are so many women who are already vulnerable, so many women who are already scared and afraid, and I don't want to see them go to people who are not trained and are not as skilled and could really hurt them and could injure them. I know what that feels like to have infertility and deal with that. And it's painful to meet young women in Connecticut who have infertility because of a botched abortion, don't feel like they have any way to get justice for what they suffered, like the women that I mentioned in these pending lawsuits against Planned Parenthood of Southern New England.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you so much for testifying, and thank you for your answers. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.